On the air.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Good evening, folks. So welcome. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. Would you like to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mary, could we get a roll call, please?
Olson.
Here.
Sykes.
Yeah.
Johnson. Here. Killam.
Here.
Kopczynski.
Here.
Coburn. Canopa.
Here. And Coburn is excused. Okay, first we have a very special presentation this evening, and this is from our Albany Fire Department for the Life Saving Award, and Chief Bradner.
All right, thank you, Mayor Canopa. So as the fire chief for the Albany Fire Department, I know that we cannot be everywhere that we want to be. We rely on members of our community to perform heroic acts in order to help us. Oftentimes it's going to take us 4 to 6 minutes to get there to that emergency, and life-threatening situations occur and they need immediate action. And tonight I'm pleased, I'm happy to be able to recognize one of our citizens for that. At the sign of a healthy community is where the individuals are willing to step up and they're willing to take risks in order to serve others and save others in this case. And so if Glenn Grimps could come forward, please. So tonight I want to recognize Glenn for a heroic act that he did on January 12th of this year. He was working at an apartment doing some painting, as I understand it, and then noticed a car where there was some smoke coming out of, and the individual inside the car was, in essence, unresponsive. Without regard for his own safety, he went over to that vehicle and tried to rouse the individual to get him to get out. He was not coherent enough to do that, so Glenn ran around the vehicle and actually physically pulled him from the vehicle, saving his life. So Glenn, we're extremely pleased with the acts that you did, and so tonight, as the Chief of the Albany Fire Department, I want to present you with a Civilian Life-Saving Award that reads, Glenn Grimps is hereby awarded the Certificate of Selfless Actions in providing life-saving assistance on January 12th, 2018. And I also want to present you with one of our Fire Department Customer Service Life-Saving Challenge coins and tell you how much we appreciate your actions on that night. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Did you want to say a few words or not?
I was just glad I was there, able to help. I would do it for anybody. I would help most everybody.
Wow. And so the car was on fire?
Yes, the car was rapidly gaining steam.
Wow.
At first it was all just smoke, but then it engulfed in the flames. And
Oh my
it was
gosh.
getting quite warm when I literally grabbed him by the shoulders and yanked him out.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yes, that was very brave. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. You were an angel for that person you just saved, so thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, is that it, Chief? Yep, all right. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next we have some scheduled business here, and this is some legislative public hearings. And this evening, Council, I think this is almost a record-breaking agenda of 600 pages. So we've promised we won't be going through every page tonight, but a lot of it is, some of it is routine. But so first is, next on tonight's agenda is a legislative public hearing regarding text amendments to the Albany Development Code as described in Planning File DC 0118. The applicant is the City of Albany Community Development Department Planning Division. I call to order this legislative public hearing at 7:20 p.m. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table next to the city clerk. Do any members wish to declare a conflict of interest? Do any members wish to abstain from participating in the proceedings? Okay, and for those wishing to testify, please be aware that you must raise an issue with enough detail to afford the council and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue if you later want to raise that issue on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the approval standards staff will describe or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or development code which you believe to apply to the decision. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the City Council may allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. At this time, I'll call for a staff report and Planning Manager Bob Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. So, as the Mayor just mentioned, we're here this evening. We've got a couple of public hearings. The first of them is on amendments to the sign code. And what I'm going to do is kind of give a very quick introduction.
Is the mic on? I can't hear.
Oh, you might have to pull it closer. Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to give a very quick introduction, and I'll turn it over to Kathy Corliss, who's been our consultant on this project from Angela Planning Group. And she'll lead through the presentation, and then we'll continue through the public hearing process and do our best to answer any questions you have. Let me flip through to the computer. So the purpose of this project, as you probably on the council list remember, is to make the sign code more content neutral. And as we got into the process to make the code more content neutral, we discovered that there were some areas that really could use some reorganization. And so about halfway through the project, we did that as well. So the purpose is to make the code more content neutral, and we tried to make it easier to read and implement through some reorganization. What we did not do, or we did not intend to do anyway, is to change the standards that govern the number of signs that a person or a business could have, or the size of the signs, or the allocation of the signs. So we try to leave all of that pretty much the same. If it was changed, we think that it was changed in a way that it would allow more, or it would just clarify what the current standards are. Should I go through this slide?
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
Unless there are questions.
Well, I think I'll leave it that introduction. The other thing I'll just mention for the public is that to date we've had work sessions with the City Council and the Planning Commission, and on June 4th, the Planning Commission considered the amendments to the proposed sign code and recommended their approval, and with some minor revisions that were presented in the cover memo that's in your packet this evening. And with that, I'll turn it to Kathy to continue the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Bob. As you may recall, I'm Kathy Corliss of the Angelo Planning Group, 921 Southwest Washington, Portland, Oregon.
I can't hear you at all.
Oh, pardon me.
I think you have.
You need to talk into the mic. I can't hear you.
My apologies. Is that better?
Yeah.
That's okay.
A little bit.
All
You're
right.
still too far away.
Yeah,
Am I?
just pull the mic closer to you.
Yes, there we go. Just
There you go.
okay.
Better mind.
All right.
I think
Well,
smaller
I'll
one.
endeavor to keep my piece from popping. Again, my name is Kathy Corliss, Angelo Planning Group, 921 Southwest Washington, Suite 468, Portland. And thank you for having me here this evening. You may recall that we talked about some of this at a joint work session with the Planning Commission and the City Council. The presentation tonight, just a quick refresher on what is content neutral. And so that's this slide, which is just kind of highlighting the emphasis on time, place, and manner regulations. So if you have to read the sign to know whether it's allowed, that's not considered content neutral. And I think Bob addressed this fairly well, which is kind of the steps that we've taken to get to this point. And the presentation, as I go forward, I'll be emphasizing those places that the draft has changed, the proposed amendments have changed since you last saw them in your work session packet. So, with no further ado, as you may recall, and as you may have read, we start out with general provisions. We've updated the purpose statement to provide a more robust purpose statement from what was in the current draft, or the current code, pardon me. And as well, the applicability has been updated. Prohibited signs, you may recall there was a conversation about this at the work session and about what is meant by obscene material, some existing prohibitions that were in the code that there were questions about. So we did some further research, and that section has been changed, and the Planning Commission approved those changes. And similarly, there were questions about current prohibitions about brightness and also neon versus LED and technology. And again, those changes were made at the Planning Commission's draft and have been accepted. Going on, again, on installation and maintenance of sign, there was a question about some existing code language that referenced moderate wind. And we did some research on that and clarified that point, and so that also is reflected in the current draft. I think abandoned and unused signs should look as you saw it previously. It's been updated from the current code, and there was language added to prevent vacant sign frames. As far as the exempt permits, or the signs exempt from permit, I should say, there were some changes since the work session based on comments, and as well, the Planning Commission, this is the section of the code where the Planning Commission recommended a further change, and that change was to signs allowed during an election, and they suggested changing that recommended changing that from 30 days to 45 days prior to the election. That's consistent with the current standard. As far as the way the code is organized now, as you may know, we've reorganized it so that temporary signs are all together, the standards related to temporary signs are organized together, and we've updated the definition of temporary signs just to clarify that, in particular, if you need a building permit or an electrical permit, it's not a temporary sign. The changes, I think, the proposed amendment should look as you saw them at your work session. There aren't any significant changes to this section since that time. And on to permanent signs, the other major sign category, of course. And we have, again, wall signs. There have been updates to the standards, but primarily just to reorganize them, to make them more understandable. We've translated them into tables. And the one clarification that came about as a result of the conversations at the work session was that we clarified that signage that's kind of earned on one wall can't be transferred to another wall. The code was perhaps today is slightly, I think it intends that it's not particularly clear, but we did try and clarify that point. The freestanding sign sections, again, are pretty much as you saw them, or are as you saw them in your work session. This section, again, as Bob pointed out, the intention here was to reorganize and clarify, and we put things in tables and so forth, but not to change the amount or type of signage that's available. Obviously, with the new DMU zone, that was added because that zone wasn't reflected is not reflected in the current code, and so that is a substantive change, but I think one that was needed, as that zone needed to have sign standards applied to it, and they are basically the same as the CV or HD. And again, the projecting signs, that section of the code today is particularly confusing. I think we've tried to do a good job of clarifying how projecting signs work, how they work relative to both wall signs and freestanding signs, because it wasn't particularly clear. And I believe that the revised language does clarify a number of points related to projecting signs, but again, we've tried to stay consistent with the amount of signage that can be allowed in a particular zone. The section on signs for theaters is fairly consistent with your existing code. The section on neighborhood signs, and these are signs that are primarily allowed for those uses that are in residential zones, so they don't get the other types of permanent signs. Those are specifically for non-residential zones. But where there are uses, oftentimes are conditional uses that are allowed, and they have a need for some signage. So this section's been updated and clarified somewhat from the current code, and further clarifying it are recommended changes from staff regarding assisted living, daycare facilities, and the like, to allow them to also have a neighborhood sign. And that neighborhood sign is a 24 square foot per face sign. So that's the signage allowed for those. Excuse me. For institutional uses in residential zones, this was language that's in the existing code today. We did some reorganizing to try and make it clear. Primarily it's for schools, I think, is who takes advantage of this, and perhaps religious institutions as well. Murals is nearly the same as your existing code. There was one place where there was an approval criteria that appeared to be, appeared as if it would be difficult to apply in a content-neutral manner, so we suggested deleting that. And the signs for non-conforming uses in residential zones, that got moved in this most recent draft. We realized it was not about the non-conforming sign, it was in fact about the non-conforming use. So we had it in the wrong place in the prior version, and so that's subsequently, or since moved. Again, permits needed, consistent with the current code. Approval of permits, consistent with the current code. The application requirements, consistent with the current permit. The application forms, we did go through those and look at the current forms and the submittal requirements and try and use consistent language. And the permits issued if the application is in order, just clarifying that that's a processed as a type 1. Very clear in the current code. The variances are fairly consistent with what you saw at your work session, and again, include minor changes to the approval criteria for clarity. And the variances for historic buildings, that hasn't been touched. That section is the same as with the current code. And the sections on general provisions, cleaning up of the out-of-date AMR. There was some existing language relative to how enforcement happens, and we deleted or suggest deleting some out-of-date amortization language that hasn't been used, and as well proposed amendments. They clarify how the how nonconformity works in a way that, and I work very closely with staff on this because we were looking for something that they could feel like they could enforce, and so I think it's much improved from the current standards, which were challenging to enforce apparently. And again, the nonconforming sign area consistent, and exemptions from nonconforming status. Definitions, there were some changes, obviously deleting definitions that were no longer used. Many of the definitions included specific language related to content. So the definition would say a sign for a yard sale includes this information about a yard sale. Clearly we can't include language like that in the code and stay content neutral. So many of the definitions had to have that kind of language removed from them, or recommended to have that removed. And as well, there was a change to use the term director, which includes designee, of course, instead of building official for these. And that is a very, very quick overview of the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Rich?
I have a couple. Can't change a sign from one face of the building to another face of the building.
So may I answer?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The intention is that you calculate the amount of signage, of wall signage that you get based on the lineal feet of building that you have. And so if you were to say have a very long wall, let's you have a corner lot, and you have a building that has a very long wall on a minor street, and you have an arterial that has a relatively narrow, or, a relatively narrow wall or frontage, you couldn't take the amount of wall signage that you earned basically from the long side and transfer it all to the front. So the intent is, and I believe this is the intent of the current code, that if you're earning a certain amount of wall signage based on one facade, that you don't rotate that all around to the other facade.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, my concern was that when you have buildings that start in, you start putting activity in an area, you'll have a building start there, and they have their sign on the side of the building so people can see it as they're driving up, and someone builds next to them. I didn't want them to not be able to have a sign because they was blocked off. Second question, there are some changes in what signs are permissible, sign frames, et cetera. This goes into effect when, and what kind of time frame do they have to do something about it if they are not in compliance?
So are you asking, like, if these amendments cause somebody to be out of compliance?
Correct. I mean, place I'm thinking about right now, marijuana store at the Y. They have a big empty sign, been empty for years. Now no longer in compliance.
No longer in compliance because they don't have a sign.
No sign in it.
Yeah.
And haven't had a sign in it for,
Yeah.
Now, they have to, 1, take it down, 2, fill it up, 3,
So the way that I believe the ordinance is written is that these amendments would take effect, if approved tonight, would take effect August 1st. You could, declare an emergency and have that done sooner, but let's say it's August 1st, and that's when the code is these amendments are in effect. At that point in time, I think that we could enforce compliance. I'm not, unless, Sean, you have a different thought on that.
Well, I mean, this is, I'll preface what I'm going to say here. This is the one area that Jessica has handled from almost its infancy till now, and Bob and with our consultant. But I guess maybe the question also would be, is there a grandfathering clause or a sunset clause on those signs that would, if you have a non-compliant sign, they have a certain amount of time, and that may be what Rich is asking too.
Well, that isn't actually what I was asking.
Okay.
I mean, you have a business, and there is something out there now that, I don't know if it's in compliance now, but let's say it's in compliance, and this changes that. All of a sudden, August 1, they're faced with, now I have to do something about this that I didn't have to do before. What kind of time do I have to get it done? Or is it, well, you're not in compliance, fix it, or we're going to fine you $1.47 times 10 to the 23rd electrons?
I'm going to try to take a quick look here at your question and see what we have in the current code.
And while Bob is doing that, if I might also address a point that you made, which is a vacant sign frame. And just to clarify, if somebody were to put in, and you see this sometimes where a business changes and they have the sign, and perhaps that sign is a permanent, a freestanding sign that's grandfathered in, and the business changes and they put in, they don't want to give up the sign structure, but they'll flip the sign over or they'll put in a blank bill. And that's acceptable because, again, we're not telling them what the sign has to say. So if they want it to be blank, that is an acceptable option under this. It's not written to, it's just not to leave the actual frame empty so that the electronics and everything is exposed. And I don't know the circumstances of the sign of which you speak.
Well, this particular one is empty and has been empty for years.
Oh,
but
okay.
That's not
It's literally empty.
I mean, I'm
Okay.
sure
Yeah.
there are other places with other situations.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So, as kind of an additional response, without having being able to look into that particular sign, but the current code says today that permanent signs in existence on the effective date of this ordinance that are not in conformance with the provisions of this ordinance shall be regarded as non-conforming signs and must be removed, altered, or replaced so as to conform within 7 years of the effective date of this ordinance. So that was that was when this original sign code was put in place. So if that sign was non-conforming, it seems as though out of the current code, we could probably enforce and have something done with it.
Bob, I'm not worried about that sign.
Oh, okay.
I'm worried about the situation, so. What I hear is, I don't know, we'll have to look into it. And if that's what it is,
Yeah,
well,
maybe David has-
okay.
I don't mean to interject, but I just want to point in the right direction. I'm David Martin, the planning department.
Can you come up here so we can hear what you're saying? Bring up the chairs.
Yes. David Martineau from the Planning Department. In the news section of the code, non-conforming signs is treated a little differently. And it's found on Exhibit A.18. And it says that non-conforming signs are subject to the following provisions. Legally established non-conforming permanent signs may continue to exist in accordance with this section. Non-conforming signs that were not legally established have no legal right to continue and must be removed or reconstructed in conformance with the code. A little bit of a different take on the language.
So it's a little bit stronger.
Okay.
David, what page is that?
It's at the 8.18. It's page 13-18 of the new code.
Did I hear you mention signs being grandfathered in? Miss?
Well,
You mentioned signs being grandfathered in. Can
So-
you tell me how those work?
so again, a sign that is legally is non-conforming can remain. I think that's the point that David was making regarding
Okay.
the non-conforming language. And I was just, are you on that right page, on the right packet? So, and again, and this would be on your packet of page, at the top, it's attachment A.26. So conforming and
What
legal.
page is that on?
A.26. Or,
Can you tell me where in this, what page in here it might be on?
I
Page 66.
She doesn't have to.
66.
Yeah.
Page 42. Page 42.
It's also on 66, 13.1, 13.810. Is that right?
I'm sorry, apparently my packet doesn't have the council packet numbers on it, or at least I'm looking at the...
You didn't get one of these 600-page packets?
Apparently not.
Why don't you just bring up another chair so you can add to the discussion?
I
Yeah,
think
you
he
can
does.
get it, I think.
Oh, you want to come in the middle? Sure. Excellent. Yeah.
That's why we got this bigger podium, so we can have a crowd of consultants.
So again, the language in question is at the bottom of the page, we're looking at 13-18. Does that help? Okay, and then it's 18, or 13-810, sub 1, and it's referring to legally established non-conforming
Yeah, well,
permanent sign.
Page 41.
No, 41, thank you. Good thing we have the press here, we'd be floundering.
Right, okay, but we're looking at their, right, okay. Does that help answer the question,
Yeah.
though, in terms of what the status would be?
1 year.
So you
All right.
really only get to grandfather the sign if it was lawfully established in the first place. If it
Okay.
was not lawfully established, you're not able to count that non-conforming. You'd have to remove it.
So somebody who has a non-conforming sign, they might be able to try and get it conforming before this goes into effect.
Yes, I believe that would be the case.
Okay.
Okay, Bessie?
Rich brought up it's actually 2977 Sandium Highway, because I was going to bring the same thing up. That sign has been empty. Is there a way of finding out if it was lawfully put there? Because the only use it's had in the last 10 years that I know of is for an advertisement for the marijuana measure.
And
stuff that we had.
it wasn't made into a
No,
they
it
just
wasn't. It
put
was
a
just
thing over the top of it. They didn't use it, make it a regular sign.
It's right in our focal area, and I'll have something else on that focal area later, but, I mean, it's just there, bare frame plus
Bare bolt. There's no
other
sign.
interior things.
It was a conforming sign, still is a conforming sign frame. There's just nothing in it at this point in time.
So it's not conforming because it has to have something on it.
They put a blank board in
It
it.
hasn't
it's
had anything
conforming.
in it for more than a year.
I know.
Well, we need to kind of not base
Anyway,
our
that's-
decisions on one
It's in the
sign.
weeds here.
We need to look at all signs, so.
Pun intended.
Yeah. Any other questions, staff? Over the sign code? Okay, all right, thank you. We will now be taking public testimony. As I recognize you, please come to the podium, state your full name and address, spell your last name, and make any comments you may have for the council's consideration. If anyone wishes to enter an exhibit into the record as part of your testimony, please briefly describe it and then present it to the city clerk. So there was only one person that signed up under the sign code changes, and that was Diane Grover. Yes, Diane?
Thank you. This is the first time I've ever done this, so hopefully I do it right. My name is Diane Grover. I live at 3010 Santiam Highway Southeast in Albany, 97322. And what brings me here this evening is we have a sign in our front yard that is totally on our property. It is considered, I guess, a freestanding sign. It advertises a business for a friend of ours. The sign has been up for almost 2 years. We've never had an issue with it until recently. Apparently, we've had a complaint about it. We've had the code enforcement person at our house the last couple of days. And so I'm just here to, I guess, find out what we can do to keep this sign. Like I said, it's been there for over 2 years. It withstands any weather. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've had some pretty wild weather, and it has stayed put. It hasn't fallen over. It hasn't ripped. It hasn't torn. It has no graffiti on it. It's totally on our yard behind a chain link fence. It does not impede sight. It doesn't impede sidewalk. And we are in a residential area, I understand that, but right across the street is industrial. There's restaurants and gas stations and all kinds of things right across the street from me. And so I'm just here to try and see if there was something we could do to allow my sign, basically. Like I said, it's been there for 2 years and we've had no issues with it in 2 years. So I'm just wondering if now it's considered non-conforming, and why did it take 2 years for us to find out it was non-conforming?
So the sign is for a business?
Yes.
But it's not at your house
It
location?
is not at our house.
Okay. So if there is some sort of variance to it, you would have to go to the planning department to talk about it, to be able to see if that could be permitted. I understand your concern. If we did allow, anyone to put up a sign in residential that was for another business, then that opens up a Pandora's box, and we would have to allow everybody to. So that's the only, the issue with it is if we allow it at one, then it could be all over, so.
Mayor, do I understand this is on Sandy Ann Boulevard?
It's on Sandium Highway.
But it's a house, I think.
It's a house.
Yeah.
Where?
It's, the house.
What's across the street?
Right across the street from Abby's Pizza.
I think it's at the Lehigh, the entrance to the Lehigh neighborhood, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the name of the
Central
Lehigh.
or one of those.
Center.
Center Street,
It's on the corner of Center and Chestnut.
okay.
It's directly across the street from Abby's Pizza.
So,
Yeah.
and it is not commercial, even though it's on Sandy Am.
No.
It's still
That's what I'm
is
told.
residential.
That's what I'm told.
Okay.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm told. And like I said, the sign's been there for 2 years. And it's, we haven't had any issues with it in 2 years. And all of a sudden now it's an issue. So I'm just trying to see if maybe there's a way that we can keep our sign.
I guess,
Bars.
Mayor, she is my constituent, our constituent. Be happy to meet with you afterwards, or, let's pick a time.
Right.
And if we need to get planning involved in whatever it is, because that's not really what this is.
Okay.
But, you got a problem, let's try and see if we can do something about it.
Right, and I just didn't know if when you were changing the sign code, if there was gonna be some way to make, because like I said, right across the street's industrial, and so, yeah. But, that's not a problem. This is new for me, and I just didn't know what I needed to do.
So yours isn't permitted with our existing code, and so even with the current code changes, it still wouldn't be permitted, but that would have to be a planning department review to be able to look at your situation.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wanted to speak on the sign code, the development code changes for the sign code? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Does any staff member wish to respond to the testimony that was presented? Bob or?
They kind of did.
Or David? Yeah. Okay, did you have any comments on anything, or?
I'll just say, to try to clarify some things, regardless of what in this kind of a case, for example, regardless of what the sign says, we're not going to be regulating it. We would look at the zone that the property is in and look at what signage is permitted by that zone. So, if this were a residential zone, then there's going to be a limited amount of signage, but there would be, under the proposed amendments, some amount of temporary signage that everybody would be entitled to. If it happened to be a commercial zone, maybe there's a house there that was there before the property was zoned. There could be some other things that we could consider. So, in a case like this, I would just encourage the lady to come speak with us, and we can try to help.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Let's see. And so does anyone have any procedural questions they would like to raise at this time? Okay. And with that, I will declare the public hearing closed at 7:55 p.m. And council, you do have a resolution that is on 92 or 69, which one are you going to use?
I'll use 92. I believe it's the
Page
same.
92.
I believe it's the same ordinance.
Yes. Okay.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code by amending the Albany Development Code text.
So it is an ordinance.
Yes.
On the sign code. So would you like the ordinance read a second time?
Title only.
Okay.
Second.
All right. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, second reading.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code by amending the Albany Development Code text.
Move for adoption of the ordinance.
Second?
All right, motion's been made in a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, okay, thank you. And so a legislative decision of the City Council may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals by filing a notice of intent to appeal not later than 21 days after the decision becomes final. Within 5 working days following adoption of an amendment or new land use regulation, the Director shall forward to the Department of Land Conservation and Development a copy of the adopted text and findings and notify the Department of any substantial changes which may have occurred in the proposal since any previous notification to the Department. Okay, all right, Council, we got that one finished, and okay, next on tonight's agenda is another legislative public hearing regarding text amendments to the Albany Development Code related to accessory dwelling units and the expedited review of certain land division and multifamily development applications as described in Planning File DC 0218 and DC 0318. The applicant is the City of Albany Community Development Department Planning Division. I call to order this legislative public hearing at 7:57 p.m. And if you wish to testify, please sign in at the table next to the city clerk. I do have one person that's already signed up for this hearing. And do any members wish to declare a conflict of interest? And do any members wish to abstain from participating in the proceedings? Okay. For those wishing to testify, please be aware that you must raise an issue with enough detail to afford the council and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue if you later want to raise that issue on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards approval standards staff will describe or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or development code which you believe to apply to the decision. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the City Council may allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. At this time, I'll call for the staff report. So, Bob, up again.
Thank you. I just need to find my...
Try it, yeah, it should be on the desktop there.
I don't...
Put the Oregon State guideline.
Is this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I don't think you want to do that.
Okay. Am I close enough here? So thank you once again. The package of code amendments this evening. And this package of code amendments is looking at three separate things, but there'll be 2 decisions. So I want to just kind of make that clear up front. There'll be one decision regarding accessory dwelling units and a second decision regarding the expedited review of land division and multifamily development. All of these amendments that are being proposed are in some way related to state legislation that has been passed with the intent of providing housing options throughout the state, and so it affects what local jurisdictions have to have in their development codes. The review criteria that apply to all of them are up on the screen, and in summary, the proposed amendments have to better satisfy the purposes of the comprehensive plan than the current language, and the proposed amendments also need to be consistent with the development code and the purposes of the various zones that they might affect. To date, these amendments that we'll be talking about have been reviewed at different points, beginning in early April with the Planning Commission, who considered some preliminary concepts for amending the development code. That was then sort of evolved into a joint meeting with the City Council and Planning Commission on May 7th. In early June, the Planning Commission then considered the actual more final draft of the development code amendments. They recommended approval with some minor revisions. And as you'll see in the package, in the memo that was in your packet for this evening, staff also recommended a couple of changes to the amendments compared to what the Planning Commission saw, but nothing real substantive. So what I'm going to do this evening is first focus on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and I'll just kind of clarify that today our code allows accessory dwelling units in residential zones throughout the city. They're referred to as accessory apartments. And the way that my presentation is going to be organized is around three factors: the type of ADUs and where they must be allowed. We'll look at the question of occupancy, and then kind of conclude with a discussion of siting and design standards. On the screen in front of you is an excerpt of the state law that's sort of pushing all this forward. And it says that cities larger than 2,500 people shall allow an area zoned for detached single-family dwellings, at least one accessory dwelling unit per single-family home. That doesn't mean, I guess the other important words up there is subject to reasonable siting and design standards. So it doesn't mean that everybody gets an ADU no matter what. It means that if somebody is interested in constructing one and they can meet the local design standards, then they have the opportunity to construct one. And the definition from the state for an accessory dwelling unit calls out three components. They're either a detached unit, separate from the building, or they are within the primary residence, or they might be within some other accessory structure like a shop. So I just sort of gave a quick overview of where they are allowed, and that compares to our current code. As I mentioned, that we do allow ADUs throughout the city today, but the difference is that the ORS requires that ADUs be allowed in areas zoned for detached single-family dwellings. Our code allows them in addition to or within the primary residence, or in a detached building if that building was built before 1998, or in a detached building if it's on a lot in a subdivision of at least 10 lots when the tentative plat was approved after July 2007. So in short, what that's saying is that we don't allow detached accessory dwelling units in all places throughout the city, which the state law requires. Because we don't allow detached, we don't allow them to occur in buildings that were built after 1998 unless it's in a subdivision, a larger subdivision greater than 10 lots. So there's some places where they're allowed and some places where they're not allowed, and that's inconsistent with the state law. So that's one of the, maybe the most important thing that needs to be amended with respect to accessory dwelling units. This is a proposed definition. I won't get into that unless you have questions of it, just I think it's kind of hard to read and get into those details at the moment. But we're proposing to amend the definition in Article 22 to align with the definition that the state has provided in the revised statutes, and that follows through into the text of the development code. So getting into the second question, one of the big questions I think that the council was going to be interested in is the question of whether or not an ADU needs to be occupied by the owner, or whether the primary residence needs to be occupied by the owner. The current code requires that. That's one of the requirements and definitions of an accessory dwelling unit, is that the property owner resides on the property, either the primary house or the accessory dwelling unit. That is proposed to be, that requirement is proposed to be removed in the current amendment. And there's some reasons. The reasons for that are, one, maybe the biggest reason is that it's difficult to enforce. A second reason is that there's many cases where it might be difficult to, where a person might not want to or might not be able to live on their property that has an accessory dwelling unit. And you would be making that property unusable to them, or at least not usable to its full extent. The third reason is that occupancy requirements are not related to siting and design. Arguably, they're not a siting and design requirement, which is what the state says that we can regulate. So, so those are kind of the three big reasons. And when this was discussed by the Planning Commission, they also recommended that requirement be removed. We can get into questions about that if you'd like, maybe when I finish my presentation. But that's one of the questions I think that the council will want to talk about. Moving on to the third piece of the presentation with ADUs is the siting and design factors. And the current code, it makes some distinction between detached and non-detached ADUs, but it's not real clear. And so what the proposed amendments do is reorganize those design standards, or not really design standards necessarily, but those standards that apply to ADUs into categories that apply to all ADUs, those that apply to ADUs that are attached or interior to the primary residence, and to those that are detached ADUs. So it breaks it into three categories. These are the standards that affect ADUs today. And so they are the size of the ADU, the size of the lot that it would be constructed on, parking requirements associated with them, setbacks, height, and then in Article 5, there are some other things regarding the front door, location of the front door, and the materials of the ADU. I'll walk through these and just as a, bring it up, and then if there's more discussion later, we can get into it. Currently, the maximum size of an ADU is 750 square feet, or 50% of the size of the primary residence, whichever is less. As we've gone through the process to date, the proposed amendments expand upon that maximum, or that maximum size for an ADU to 900 square feet, or 75% the size of the primary residence. And one of the things that the Planning Commission wanted to include in this definition of size is to make it clear that the size is only referring to living area. And so that's something that you'll just kind of see here, is that it's talking about the living area of the ADU and the living area of the primary residence, as opposed to garages or carports. And that was already implied in the current code. They just wanted to make it more explicit. Lot size is the second factor. Currently, the code says that to have an ADU, the property has to meet the minimum lot size of the underlying zone. That's proposed to be changed to not regulating the size based on the actual square footage, but to say if a lot was legally created, or it's legally established anyway, that if it meets the setback standards and the lot coverage requirements, then that is what matters. And the reason for that proposed change is a couple reasons. One is that in any zone today, we look at the average minimum lot size. So if it's an RS10 zone, you could have a lot that's perfectly legal, that's 9,000 or 8,000 square feet, if on balance, when the subdivision is created, the minimum lot size is 10,000 square feet. So you have some that are 9,000, some that are 11,000, the average is 10,000, and that's all perfectly fine. So you might have a case where you have an RS10 zone, and under the current code, for example, you might have a case where you have somebody in the RS10 zone and they don't have a 10,000 square foot lot, even though their lot was legally created, and the code might say, sorry, you can't have an ADU there because it's not 10,000 square feet, yet you could be in an RS5 zone with a 5,000 square foot minimum, and a person with a 5,000 square foot lot could have an ADU. So what this does is it sort of changes that balance, and as long as you can meet the setbacks, and as long as you can meet the lot coverage requirements and other development standards, you could one could construct an accessory dwelling unit. And it makes it, I think that's a simple way and a fair way to implement the code. Parking is another issue, and I'll try to talk a little bit about this now, and I anticipate there'll be some questions as we get through this. Currently, the code requires that if somebody wants to construct an ADU, they have to have the 2 parking spaces that are required for the primary residence, and they have to have a 3rd parking space that's associated with the ADU. The proposed amendments generally keep that in place, but it does change to say that if there's on-street parking available abutting the property, and that on-street space is at least 25 feet in length, that space, that public space on the street can count toward the 3 parking space requirement. And the result of that is that it can facilitate the construction of ADUs, because it's one less cost and one less constraint on the site that somebody would need to worry about to be able to construct an ADU. And there are also some other potential benefits, depending on your view on this, for that kind of a change. One is that it keeps somebody from having to turn their yard into concrete where they're going to be parking a car. It would also potentially prevent somebody from having to widen their driveway, maybe from a 14 or 16-foot driveway to a 24-foot wide driveway to accommodate more cars getting in and out of there. And a wider driveway is going to mean less room on the street to park. If somebody didn't do that and they needed to, another option would be for them to potentially construct a 2nd driveway on their lot to serve the ADU, and that could be up to 24 feet wide if they had the space for it. And that in itself would take parking from the street. So by allowing some, in certain circumstances when there is abutting parking available on the street, to allow that to count towards the ADU, it means that the people on the property can use that parking space, and so can anybody else from the public who might be in that area. If you take that space away on the street, like the physical space with a curb cut for a driveway, then the only person who can really take advantage of that public space is the person who owns the lot. So there's some other benefits to that approach to parking. Better get a drink of water before I get into setbacks. This topic generated quite a bit of discussion. I think that the proposed amendments have worked through some of the comments and issues that were raised at the work session. So, again, one of the benefits of going through those work sessions and getting ideas and different perspectives on this stuff. So I'll talk first about the Article 3, which are like our residential zones, as opposed to the mixed-use zones. The current setback in the current code, the setback standard is somewhat ambiguous because it doesn't really talk about how to handle attached or interior ADUs. The proposed setbacks for interior, if it's inside the house, are that you meet the setback standards and height requirements for just what a house would be. The thought is that the ADU is inside of the house, or if it's an addition to the house, it would be just like anybody building any addition. They just have to meet setback standards and height standards and lot coverage requirements. Nothing special for the fact that it's having another kitchen in there or a living unit. So as proposed, that for interior ADUs, the setback standards would be just the same as what it would be for a house. Detached setbacks would also be similar, but there's a couple things I want to point out. So in the current code, the front setback, it states that the front setback of the ADU has to be greater than or equal to the location of the front wall of the primary residence. And for interior setbacks, has to be 5 feet or 1 feet, depending on if it's a 1- or 2-story building. So some proposed changes to the interior setbacks here. And I know this is a little bit difficult to read, so I'll try to just articulate this for you. The proposed amendments keep the language about having to be equal to or greater than the front setback of the primary house, But it also includes a statement that the ADU has to meet the setback standards of the underlying zone. The reason for that is that there are occasions where a house is non-conforming, is closer to the street than the current code would allow. And so rather than saying, okay, you've got a non-conforming house, you don't meet your front setback requirements, but you're too close to the street, because of that, that's not a reason why your accessory dwelling unit should also be non-conforming. So with the first sentence here is language that says the front setback shall be no less than the minimum front setback for the underlying zone. You just have to meet zone standards. It's normal. You also have to be equal to or greater than the front setback of the house, the primary residence, and if it's on a corner lot, you only have to be set back from one of those walls. I'll show you what this means. Hopefully this helps make some sense of what I just said. So on the far left, I've got 4 examples of how this could look. On the far left, there's the primary house. There's a street on the top. The dashed line is a street. The dark lines are a setback line, and the orange blocks are the primary house and the ADU. So on the left, first one, you've got the primary residence and the ADU both up against the setback, and that's fine. And the ADU is equal to the primary residence, so that one is okay. The second scenario is also okay because the ADU meets the setback standard and it's recessed further than the front wall of the primary house, so that's okay. The third option, this is a scenario where there's a house that may not meet current setback standards. It's too close. It crosses where the front setback line would be. So you wouldn't be able to build a new house that way, but the ADU, it's not equal to the front wall of the house because it wouldn't meet the setback standards. So the ADU has to meet the normal setback standards of the zone. The fourth scenario is the one that doesn't work because in that situation, the ADU, the primary residence is set back farther and the ADU is set up closer. So it's closer to the street than the front wall of the ADU. So that's kind of what the code is getting at. Yes, sir, Councilor Kupczynski.
So, but hypothetically, on number 4, if the garage portion of the house extended forward, because we're not counting, it's not livable space, so that really wouldn't affect the ability for the measuring distance to allow for the ADU of the house.
Well,
a lot of the houses are built with the garage sticking out.
If it's a new garage, if that's what we're kind of talking about, a new structure that would have a garage, that would have to be set back 20 feet from the property line anyway.
Anyway, okay.
But the other part of that answer is if it's an existing ADU that's non-conforming, or I'm sorry, if it's an existing structure, say somebody has a shop there or an outbuilding, and it's like that, it's non-conforming, but otherwise it's legal, it's done fine, they can still convert that building under the proposed amendments. They would be able to convert that existing building to an ADU. So if it was already constructed. So it's pretty open that way. Okay. The corner lots is another one we kind of struggled with a little bit and came up with some language that I think addresses the issue. The issue being that, well, let me show you the examples here, and then I'll try to, I think that will lead me to what the issue is. So, again, the street's on the top of the dash line, the street's going down the middle of those 2 lots, hypothetical lots. The lot on the left has the ADU. Well, let me step back one step. On a corner lot, each of the property lines that are abutting a street are a front yard. So there's 2 front yards on a corner lot. So in this, on the left scenario 1, the ADU is in front of the primary residence relative to the street going up and down in the middle, but it's recessed from the the top street. So that scenario is okay, because it meets it's recessed from one of the walls of the primary residence, and that's what the proposed amendments say. The second scenario wouldn't work because that ADU is not recessed from either of the two front walls of that house. So there's the front walls of the house are the two that are facing the street. The reason why we put this language in here is to address a situation where you might have, if you look at the scenario on the left, if the only place where that ADU could go is where the letter 1 and OK is, that's really not allowing a person to take advantage of their lot and the space that they have. In this case, in that kind of a scenario, the most of the space is closer to one street. And so it allows, in that kind of a scenario, a person to take advantage of the space they have on their lot, as opposed to saying you have to like stick it in the very back corner just so you can be behind both front walls of your house. Does that, I know that's kind of confusing. Does that make sense? Do you have questions about that? Okay. We can come back to, yes.
I see all the examples are side by side. For some reason, I was thinking that we were also thinking that you could build behind also if your lot was deep enough?
Sure, you can.
Okay.
Yep. I was just making hypothetical scenarios. They were easy to exemplify.
Okay, all right,
yep.
Thanks.
But you're right. As long as the ADU met the setback standards and is behind one of the front walls of a house, then it's going to be fine. And in a lot of cases on interior lots, these lots look pretty small, but if you imagine it was bigger, the ADU, say if you look at scenario 2, that ADU could be tucked behind the house, no problem.
Yeah, because I think when we met with the planning, that one of the questions was about the height and everything like that when it was in the back and the setbacks toward, the back property rather than the side. So this takes care of everything then as far as
what this does is that it just sticks with the standards that exist in place, that are in place today regarding setbacks and height requirements.
I'll just make sure I don't ever build one.
Bob,
yes.
Are you an OSU fan?
I am. I like.
Smile.
They just won.
Did they? They won it?
5-3.
Oh, they won?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Pulled it out in the ninth inning.
Wow, excellent.
Okay,
That's what all that stuff in the background back there, high-fiving and stuff was all about.
Well, I was getting a text from my husband, and earlier it didn't sound like it was good, but.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Now we can pay attention.
Excellent, they won.
I have to admit that was on my mind before coming in. So
Yeah.
thanks for the update.
Oh.
Though I didn't know what to say because I know there's some Duck fans. I'm trying to be like diplomatic and neutral
Well,
too. So.
most folks up here are Beaver fans.
Okay.
We don't have Wes Hare anymore.
So Article 5, the setback standards that I just mentioned to you are the same that would apply to Article 5. That's for the interior or attached. For the detached, there are some potential slight differences in terms of like walls less than or equal to 8 feet tall, a 3-foot setback, walls less than or greater than 8 feet tall, a 5-foot setback. But that's the current code, so those standards are being retained. So moving on from setbacks, I think the last factor were height and exterior materials. So in Article 3 today, there's a maximum height of 24 feet to the ridge of a roof for a detached ADU, and that's proposed to stay the same. However, if, as I mentioned earlier, if the ADU is inside of a building or is an addition to a house, then that could be whatever the underlying zone height standards are. Just because today, if somebody wanted to come in and build an addition, they could build to whatever height requirements the zone would allow. It wouldn't be limited to 24 feet.
So Bob, so if you have a whole neighborhood that's all one level, single family, all one level, one story, so then somebody could build a detached ADU and go up 24 feet?
Yes, that's correct. And that's the current standard.
So if that was a flat roof building, that could be a two-story building?
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of a nice one.
Or you could put it on top of a garage.
It's the same as the current standard.
Right.
It is the current standard, and we've just left that alone.
Well, I'm thinking of a street of single-family houses, single story, and somebody slaps in a two-story flat roof ADU in the front yard. I can see neighborhood consternation, perhaps.
Sure. Yeah. One thing, it's not really within what we're trying to do with this particular project, which is really just to get our code cleaned up and complying with state law, and that's why many of the actual standards aren't changing. But the kind of thing that you're talking about could be considered. I think you're aware that we're in the process of getting doing some pretty substantial work on the development code. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at, that's scheduled to look at, is infill kinds of development, townhomes, and those sort of things, to make sure that the standards that we have are what you would want to see. And that would be an opportunity to look at that and make some additional design standards, to say if it's got a pitched roof, it has to have a pitched roof or something like that. Other jurisdictions have that kind of design standards if you wanted to pursue that sort of a thing. So in Article 5, there's not a special or separate height standard for ADUs. And based on direction from Council and Planning Commission at the last work session, there's this language about substantially matching the exterior materials, colors, and finish of the primary structure, and that's proposed to be retained. Right, so other ADU amendments, this is pretty minor stuff. Just kind of cleanup related to the amendments that I don't think I need to get into now. And I will use the last few minutes here to talk about expedited land divisions and expedited multifamily review. And the thing that I'll say about both of those is that we're not making any changes to the code in terms of how we would regulate subdivisions or multifamily development. Those are essentially references, and updating the references that we have in our development code to cite Oregon revised statutes, so that one, just to make it transparent that those things exist, that these expedited review processes exist for both staff, for anybody who might be applying, and really just to be able to easily point to those state laws that we need to apply for those kinds of development. So it brings it in by way of reference, but it won't change the way we deal with any other kind of subdivision or apartment that might be proposed. So with that, I think that's the end of my slides, and I can take any questions you have.
The only thing I was saying, I know it might not seem like there is much changes from the existing, but really there's two changes. One would be going from 750 square feet to 900 square feet, correct? And then the other would be allowing on-street parking on that, so.
And the owner occupancy, I think those are the three big ones.
Yeah. Okay. Council, do you have any questions, staff?
Just anecdotal, I think it was this morning, Portland kind of changed the game up there. They've eliminated all SDC payments required for any ADU that they have across the entire community, trying to force, or not force, incentivize, I guess, more ADUs to come and do infill. So they're going to eliminate any of the SDCs required to go along with it. So they're going to be foregoing, they said, a huge amount of dollars.
And you didn't do that.
How are they going to pay for it?
They haven't decided that yet.
It's
Yeah.
Portland, they don't pay for anything.
Portland has no room to expand. They only have, the only thing they can do is just infill and keep building up.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then yet the state law changes for the whole state to have to meet the needs of Portland, basically, is why this is in front of us, so. But, okay, any other questions?
I do.
Okay. Yeah.
If I have a single-family lot zoned for single-family housing, and I came into you and I said, I want to build a house, and I want to build an attached accessory DU, could I just go ahead and build that duplex?
Could you say that, I didn't catch would we call it a duplex? Is that what you?
Well, I wouldn't call it a duplex, but in the fact it would be a duplex. Can I just go ahead and do that? And in fact, then can I bypass the planning commission and the city council? Seeing as how it's an ADU?
So there's two questions there. You wouldn't be able to, technically it wouldn't be a duplex if a duplex isn't permitted, because you would still have the size limitations that would go with an ADU. So there'd be some difference. But to your point that yes, a person could come in and build a house with an ADU attached to it as part of a single project, and that wouldn't require review by the planning commission or the city council. That would be something that they would just get a building permit for. I mean, we would review it to make sure that it complied with the development code, but it wouldn't require a land use process.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
No, thanks.
Okay. We will now be taking public testimony. As I recognize you, please come to the podium, state your full name and address, spell your last name, and make any comments you may have for the council's consideration. If anyone wishes to enter an exhibit into the record as part of your testimony, please briefly describe it and then present it to the city clerk. So the only person that signed up was Marcy Howard. Marcy, would you like to come forward, please?
Thank you. Thank you for your attention. There should be a letter in front of you that I brought explaining my personal situation and desire for an ADU. Our son owns property here in Albany, 1.7 acres, that is in the city's jurisdiction. My husband is retired and disabled. I am home caring for him now, and we moved here recently hoping to build our retirement home on our son's property, and there's plenty of room for a home. When we got here, we realized at that time that the code required only 750 square feet of eligibility, and that it must be attached to his home. That wasn't possible in this particular case. So the increase in size, 900 square feet is pretty small, but I think the two of us can manage it. The fact that the new code is allowing for a detached structure also suits our needs. There's lots of room for us to comply with all of the new code, but the fact that the old code wouldn't have allowed us to do this, and the new code will, or as it's written, is very important to us. So I would like you to consider voting for that. There have to be more families than ours with this potential things in their futures. We find ourselves very lucky to have the opportunity, and kids who want us here. And if the city will allow it, then we can proceed. retire here and be neighbors with our kids and look after each other.
So I've got a question. I mean, increasing the size of ADUs, we have to look at every citywide, every lot. So you've got 1.7 acres you have in your...
Our son does, yes.
Yeah, and so you could already build a home there if you just got a lot line adjustment.
The access to that lot doesn't allow that. We would have to get permission from one of the neighbors to use part of their land to come in. Only if we are able to use our son's driveway and share that access can we build a home there. We thought at first that we would divide the lot and do that because we could build a larger, more comfortable home then.
Yeah.
But access to that home was not possible. One of the neighboring properties said that that might be a possibility, but only if everything else failed. No one was willing to say, sure, we'll let you use the corner of our property for access. So we have been 7 months now, hoping that this rewriting of the code for ADUs will allow us to build a little retirement cabin and be neighbors with our kids and share their access.
But you currently could have just built an addition onto the house at, you know, with that amount of land, and that wasn't something you wanted to do, kind of?
It doesn't allow for enough room. The back of our son's property has a sewer line that runs through it. So our addition to his house would have been no more than a bedroom. And
yeah, I just can't visualize. I know where 906 Broadway is, I just can't place which property, so yeah.
Is that North Albany Broadway? Or,
pardon me?
Is that Broadway on this side of the river or North Albany?
This side. It's right on the corner of Broadway and 9th, right over here by West Albany High School. It's a very unique piece of property.
Yeah. Huh.
And what we thought would be a simple process is not.
Is it on the east or west side of Broadway?
On the west side of Broadway.
On the west side. Yeah. Yeah, amazing for 1.7 acres. Normally, a person can get a lot of homes on 1.7 acres.
That's exactly what we thought.
Yeah. So.
And many things prevented that. It seemed like one after the other. I mean, I had several conversations with my new best friend, David Martineau.
Yeah.
And at one point, I told him, I feel like I'm being punched in the face every time I come up with a new possibility. And this is our next possibility, and we think it'll work.
Okay. All right. Okay. Questions? All right. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else that would like to speak on the accessory dwelling units or the expedited land division for that public hearing? Okay. Not seeing anyone. Does staff have any wish to respond to any testimony? Bob? Okay. All right. Is there anyone have procedural questions that they would like to raise at this time? Okay. If not, I will close the public hearing at 8:38 p.m. And council, there is an ordinance and which would be two, so let's take up the first one, which would be over the ADUs, and that's either page 226 or 202. Which one are you using?
Go with 202.
To page 202. Okay, would you like to do the first reading?
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code by amending the Albany Development Code text and adopting findings.
Move to have the ordinance read a second time in title only.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
All right.
I see the press taking copious notes. Hopefully it'll appear in the paper. Perhaps we'll get some public comment on this, these ideas.
Okay, all right.
And I hope we can listen to them if somebody comes at our next meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so this one will be held over to the next meeting. And And then next ordinance would be on page 241. This one would be for the expedited land reviews.
Move to have it read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm fumbling through,
Finding
trying to
it.
find the
Separating
241
pages.
there.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 4441, which adopted the City of Albany Development Code by amending the Albany Development Code text and adopting findings.
Move to have the ordinance read a second time, title only.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
I'm opposed to this one too, and vote no.
Okay, all right. And this one will be held over till our next council meeting next month. So, okay, I think that took care of those items. Next, this would be item B, and it says public hearing, but this isn't a public hearing. And this is the adoption, this would be in a resolution for just an adoption of the resolution for parks and recreation fees. And Ed, did you have anything you'd like to make comments?
I'll try not to get all choked up after watching the results of the Beavers game.
You got to watch it back then a bit.
That was tough. That was tough. I don't know that I really need to describe what's in your packet, maybe just make a couple of comments. Just a reminder to the council that every year we try to review our program fees and charges, and typically we'll make changes in a single year to one or two programs. We never make a carte blanche or a set of changes fully applicable to all of our activities. We just try to stagger it as the years go by. The fee increases that we're proposing primarily in aquatics and also in rentals at the senior center. We last raised those fees 2 fiscal years ago. And the second point I'd like to remind you of is that the Parks and Recreation Department budget in significant measure depends on these fees and charges in order to balance the checkbook that is the Parks and Recreation Fund. We don't get 100% tax support for all the activities that you ask us to deliver, all the services you ask us to deliver. In fact, by council policy, you have asked us to raise at least part of the cost of our doing business through fees and charges. So that's why we come back to you every year and we try to make judicious changes in our fees and charges, and we hope you will support that again this year. Perhaps one more comment. The aquatics fees that are being proposed would raise about $20,000 in the next fiscal year. That projection is based on the number of participants we expect, or that we would project over the course of the year. Those fees aren't realized if people don't show up. So $40,000 in, $20,000 in expected increased revenue. That compares to $40,000 increased expenses in the budget that you just passed. And so the $20,000 that we're not getting through increases in fees, we're making up by reducing costs in other places. So it's another point I'd like to make is that if we were raising fees to cover 100% of our program operating costs, our fees would go up dramatically, more significantly than we typically do in a single year. And with that, I'm glad to take any questions or comments.
Okay, questions?
Ed, it was nice to read in the paper, in the DH, that a Cool Pool has actually generated a small profit.
It did this past year, and the last time we did it before last year was the very first year it operated, which was 2005. Our average operating subsidy at the Cool Pool is about 7%. In other words, we raise about 93% of what that pool costs through gate and rentals.
Okay. Glad to see the Waverly Duck is bringing some more paddle boat users.
Yeah,
So-
how about that?
Yeah. so-
And more ducks and geese.
Yeah.
Friends.
Okay, council, there's a resolution on page 255. What would you like to do with this item?
Move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Okay, motion carried. Thank you, Ed. All right, next is repealing public works fees. Oh, whoops, I skipped business from the public. So is there anyone from business from the public this evening? That needed an item to bring forward to us? No? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for catching that. I hit that circle. Next would be an ordinance is on page 257. And first reading?
An ordinance repealing ordinance number 5359 that authorized creation of a budget activities within the street fund for revenues and expenditures of monies for the non-oversized portion of future arterial and collector roadways and provided for a process to finance those street improvement assurance fees and declaring an emergency.
Move that the ordinance be read a second time in title only.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay. One no, so that one's held over. Was there staff that wanted to mention anything on this fee? Yes. Rob?
Maybe we should have had staff talk about it before.
Yeah.
Before it failed. Kind of did.
Yeah. Okay.
Didn't have anything specific to say other than was kind of brought these forward from the last council meeting to have a little bit more discussion. There was kind of procedural error the last council meeting, so they were adopted with ordinances. So just to say that. So that was it.
All right. Questions? No? Okay. All right. Thank you. So this will be carried over for the next meeting. Okay. And now we have another ordinance. This would be on page 258, and I'm presuming this is just another one that's carried forward the same on this one, yeah.
Mayor,
from
these
our
are
last one.
at the last meeting, we had the discussion about repealing these fees, but we just missed that they were established by ordinance. So the resolutions were passed to intend to repeal the fees, but the ordinances weren't voted on last time. That's all that
Okay.
happened.
Gotcha.
Question.
Uh-huh.
Why is there an emergency clause?
Well, there doesn't have to be an emergency clause, but these aren't used anymore, so might as well get them off the books, I guess. I don't know, Sean, if you have any.
No, I mean, same thing. I mean, they can take effect in 30 days, but like I said, they're not being used anymore, so.
Either way is
Yeah,
fine.
they're not going to make a difference one or the other, I guess.
Yeah.
The intent is just for housekeeping, and the only reason they're coming back is because at the last meeting, we failed to read the ordinance as a title only, so it's really just a procedural thing, and their preference is that it get passed by July 1, just to make the books clean for housekeeping reasons.
Okay. So these were on our last agenda, but we
Yeah.
didn't. but
They're
we
on the
missed-
last agenda, but they were listed under resolutions, so they didn't get called out and read a first and second time. So it's just procedural. There isn't anything more interesting than just that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we had long 4-page agenda then, so, okay, do you want to read the first reading?
An ordinance repealing ordinance number 5355 that authorized the formation of a special connection charge for the unassessed portion of project costs related to the construction of the Columbus Street Sanitary Sewer Lift Station and declaring an emergency.
Move that the ordinance be read the second time in title only.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, and second reading?
An ordinance repealing ordinance number 5355 that authorized the formation of a special connection charge for the unassessed portion of project costs related to the construction of the Columbus Street Sanitary Sewer Lift Station and declaring an emergency.
Move to adopt the ordinance.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you. And next is supplemental budget. So, Gina, did you want to say a few words, or?
Really, everything is in the memo and in the resolution. We don't really have a whole lot of changes. The primary Increases in appropriations are due to the conflagration overtime expenses and the revenues that were brought in from that conflagration events. Also, we have $100,000 for municipal court to help fund their position, and we were able to increase the amount of revenues we brought in from fines, which is one of the directives that council had asked us to do, and we can pay for that position with those revenues. So really, most of the items that are on here are offset by additional revenues, and some of them are just almost kind of a procedural where we have to have transfers to move monies between funds. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them if you do.
Okay, questions?
It was the conflagration mainly in California.
Chief Bradner would probably be able to answer that better than I would.
Well, that's where the current one is trying to blow up.
We had a total of 6 conflagrations during 2017, or the first part of this fiscal year. 4 of them were in Oregon, 2 of them were in California. As far as reimbursements go, on the personnel costs, $340,000 was from the Oregon conflagrations and $456,000 was from the California. So a little bit more on the California. They were longer duration deployments.
Is there much left there to burn?
Yeah, I think so.
It's on fire right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on fire now.
Yeah. We actually make money on this, don't we?
Yeah, correct. Of the money from that we received last year, just over $180,000 went back toward the fire department's equipment replacement fund, and those revenues were from equipment costs that we incurred.
Is that federal money?
Well, indirectly, yes. All these fires, I'm sure, were FEMA fires. We were reimbursed by the state, whether it be Oregon or California, and then they get reimbursed at a 75% from FEMA. So 75% of it came from FEMA, 25% of it came from either Oregon or California.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, council, there's a resolution on page 261.
Move to approve.
Second?
Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you, Gina. Next would be on page 2, starting on page 265, is the Community Development Block Grant Consolidated Plan. This goes on to page 575. And I think, Bob, were you taking care of this because Ann was on vacation? I think there was some letters, council, that was handed out on the dais, and this was letters that were in support of what you mentioned at the last council meeting, was to be having some support for some low-income housing. Yeah, Bob?
And that is about all that I have to say, really, is that this was brought for public hearing at the last council meeting, but the comment period was still open, and so we requested the council not pass the resolution at that point in time. Since that meeting, we've received 3 additional comments that will be incorporated into the consolidated plan, and that was really the purpose of postponing or waiting until tonight to ask the council to make that decision to pass the resolution.
Okay. Questions over the plan?
Gone over.
Okay. There is a...
Mayor?
Yep,
I still have a concern over the administrative fees being 25%.
20%.
I thought it was 25.
I think it's
She
20.
told me, she said last time it was approaching 25%.
I think
20% is still too high.
it's 20% of the amount of money that the city receives from the grant can be used to cover administrative costs, which include, in this case, the cost of covering Ann's time, and it can also be used for things like translation services and other of those kinds of public notices and those kinds of things. So the grant pays for her, so the city isn't paying her portion of that work, and then the rest of the money is distributed out for social services, small business grants, those sorts of things.
I understand that.
Okay.
I just,
I'm
making a generalized statement that 20 to 25% for administrative costs, in my opinion, is too high.
Can you tell me how much she was paid to do that? In rough terms.
Well, perhaps part-time.
Well, she's working less than three-quarter time, and I mean, it's around, I think, 80,000, something like that.
Yeah.
It's in the ballpark there without looking.
My point is, the whole program is very small money-wise.
Yeah.
And you're not paying her a princely sum, or princessly sum, I guess.
He just said it was $80,000.
Pardon me?
I think he just said it was $80,000.
Her salary, I think. Not the.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that's her pay, and it's the other stuff that goes along with pay.
But her position also does some counter work too on planning.
Well, yeah, and as went through the budget this year, it's a little bit different than it has been in the past, where her position is funded from the general fund and will be reimbursed with the block grant money. And I don't have the exact personnel costs for her position right now.
I don't need that. I'm just pointing out that it's
right. And so as you can see,
small.
There's so much compliance to have to be able to report. This plan of 300 pages Ann had to do up.
No, I understand
for the
that.
position. And then there's also each recipient of funds, there has to be a reporting process on that. So it's kind of a cumbersome process, but also before we accepted funds years back, before we started accepting the CDBG funds through HUD, that was a question of the council, what are we going to be able to administer over this program? We knew then we needed to be able to have the funds to be able to pay for staffing to administer over it. So that was the conversation back then before we established.
Well, that was a conversation back then. That's ancient history. Today is today. That was yesterday. And I'm just bringing up, in my opinion, that 20 to 25% overhead cost is too much. That's all I'm saying, and I'm sorry I brought it up.
No, I mean, it's a good question, to have, so.
I don't agree it's a high percentage.
Yeah.
Well, it is, I guess I'd make the point that it is not uncommon for government programs to eat up funds in administration. You go buy medical oxygen, a cylinder will cost you $50. That same exact size cylinder with the same exact oxygen in it costs $22 to an industrial customer. And the difference is the paperwork and the garbage you have to go through to get it done. I mean, it's one of the reasons I don't sell medical oxygen. It just bothers me.
Okay, council.
I agree with you.
Any other questions? In other words, there's a resolution on page 266.
Move to approve the plan.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, and any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, and that would be 1 no.
1.5.
Half don't count.
Okay,
all right, thank you,
that half
Bob.
don't count.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that Mr. Sykes or Mr. Kellum that voted no?
That was Sykes.
Thank you.
Pick one.
Yeah. Okay, let's see, we got that done. Okay, next would be revising the City of Albany Police Department Public Records request, fees and procedures, and this would be a resolution on page 576. So any questions? You have a captain in the back of the room. Other words, I'll entertain a motion.
Sounds like we have a question.
got a question?
I can have a question after we get the motion. Move to approve and have a second, then I'll ask the question.
I'll second.
Okay, all right.
It says the whereas, we're going to use a third-party redaction software. Do we already have them online and contract with them, or who?
Yes, the services, yes, the services are already there. I don't think at the outset, we didn't have in our normal records and fees procedures, because the WatchGuard videos are a different form of media that has to be redacted, and it's a special process. So that redaction is the redaction for those is what was added in the fee schedule.
So refresh my memory, so when do the cameras go into actual use?
We're actually using them. Okay. They're in test mode now. We have them in the units are in the cars and the cameras are here. Getting the finished product to a cloud server to be disseminated to the district attorney was a lot of the holdup. Access to our department's information has to be very tight, and so the city has been working on that diligently. It's just taken a long time because not only is it ours, but it's also Lynn County's, and so, as well as the district attorney. So those all have to match up and meet, and this is why it's taking a while.
I recall there was discussion about the capacity for storage, the needs for that long-term, et cetera, so.
Yeah, and if you needed an example of what the fee, it would kind of cost for like a 30-minute video, I could give you that breakdown, but it's just passing it along to the consumer who wants these redacted videos.
So somebody who happened to get arrested could say, I want a copy of the video of me?
They would already get that because, well, the arrestee would already get that through discovery. That's something that's provided. But other people who would request a copy, that would be those services.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, there's a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next is adoption of the consent calendar. So there was just 3 items of minutes on there. If there isn't any items needing to be pulled off, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Move for the adoption of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. All right, and next is award of contract, and this is for custodial services. This is a resolution that's on page 592. Is there any comments from staff? Yep, Ed?
Did I understand there were some questions? Did someone say they had questions?
So any questions?
Well, before we had questions as to the amount of increase and why it just kind of happened. Because it seemed like it was more than should have had ought to been.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll take a step back, Counselor, and just let you know where we are with this revised contract proposal. On the 9th of April, we did present a contract to you, and the council had a couple of significant concerns. One was the cost increases that were programmed into the contract, which was a flat 5% increase per year after year 1, starting with a first-year contract price of $290,600. You asked us to, and you also had a question about whether the state statutes really required us to directly negotiate with this kind of a business, what's known as a QRF, or Qualified Rehabilitation Facility. And the answer to that question is yes, state law requires that we do that, and so we don't have a choice in that matter. I would also add at this point that the contractor that we've been negotiating with has been our contractor for the last 7 years, and it's actually performing quite well. So I don't want any misinterpretation out there in the space out there that would be interpreted as a criticism of our contractor. So you asked staff to go back and negotiate some more. We negotiated, Rick Barnett and Tom Valentino took the lead on this, and negotiated a lower first-year cost, about $20,000 lower than what was originally proposed, and also got the contractor to agree to a annual adjustment to the contract price of no more than 3%, but each adjustment based on the CPI, which is consistent with every other contract that we execute. So I think the staff was pretty responsive to your concerns, and they were the appropriate concern. We would agree with everyone.
Yeah, it's not enough money to be an unfunded mandate, I don't think. I think it has to be 14%, as I'm recalling. Anyway, I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Bessie?
Yeah. First of all, could you explain what you just said? That what has to be 14%?
Well, anytime the state tells you you have to do something,
Yeah,
and they don't give you the money for it,
yeah,
it's an unfunded mandate.
right.
And there is a portion of how much you have to spend in order, you can say, wait a minute, no, that's too much money. That's more than a certain percentage. And I don't remember what the exact percentage is. But that's actually in the Constitution. They can't tell you that and make you do something unless they give you the money if it's more than that percentage.
Okay, percentage of what?
Of your total.
Of your total budget or, okay, that's the part that I was...
Expenditure in those terms. You want to know about it? Talk to the county, because they're the ones who are beating everybody up over it.
Well, I know, that's why I'm questioning it, but Ed, on page 590 of the last paragraph, it says, the new proposed contract also will permit the city to provide some of the custodial services with in-house personnel.
Yes.
So are you going to have Gina clean the toilets or what?
Well, if she wants to, we'd be glad to let her do that. I don't think she's offered.
I don't think so.
No, that's sort of a cryptic reference to, if you look on, what is it, page 593, there's a table.
Okay.
So there's a per facility estimate of costs. And the senior center in particular for that space is a pretty high cost. And there's high demand, high use at that facility. Our staff is taking a look at the possibility of bringing custodial services back in-house at some point at the senior center. And if we do so during the life of the contract needs to be flexible enough to allow us to take that option. So we're looking at that, and that would have to be a budget discussion.
So if you can do that, then couldn't Mr. Hart come and do the services that he was doing for a lot less money?
At the senior center?
Yeah, he was doing senior center, well, the parks buildings.
You know, Bessie, this is out of my sphere. Rick's back there. Maybe Rick can answer that question. He's more intimate on that.
Arts was doing the senior center, which take the daily cleaning, Maplewood preschool, which takes a weekly.
You need to be at Mike.
And the Swanson Center, yeah.
No, that's okay. Harts was doing the senior center, which is a daily cleaning. They were doing Maple Lawn preschool, which I believe is a weekly, and they were doing the Swanson building. So those are very small pieces, but then when you add them to the senior center, at some point we may want to do something in-house. Again, it's a private we can do it in-house. We can do all of it in-house if we chose to do that. But it doesn't work cost-wise. But we can't have a private contractor do it according to the state.
Yeah, it's we're bound to a QRF.
Yeah, so how have we been able to do it for the last years that Hart's been doing it?
Was it not that the QRF couldn't meet the parameters of the scope of work?
There was some, yeah, we had somebody retire, And so we were doing it in-house. We had somebody retire, and we were, there was some issues as to their ability to do it as we needed it done. And there was also some, just kind of a timing thing as well, based on where we were with the contract.
We got to this point in a convoluted way. We had the QRF, but they didn't have the contract. They didn't have in their contract the services to those buildings. We had a staff member performing those services. That staff member then goes away, and we had to pick up the custodial work in another way. The QRF at the time wasn't able to pick up those services, so we went apart to pick up those services in those buildings.
And it was always known that it would just be for a period of time, as we worked with Ken on that.
But since we're starting a new contract phase, then the QRF is the party that we have to negotiate with.
Yeah, because I went back and from what Mr. Hart said is that, I mean, that he didn't realize it was going to be just temporary. I mean, he was doing it for less money, and so it's, yeah, like you said, it sounds like it's convoluted, but if we were able to do it.
Well, I think our understanding of how we got Hart's involved is different than his, Bessie. And so I think I would respectfully disagree that there wasn't an understanding at the time we engaged their services. But I can understand he's got a different perspective.
If you have a different understanding, it's a different understanding. That's how things like that happen.
Well, and there are still things that we would contract with him to do, just not within that contract, within that. This contract, yeah.
Please. Okay, Mike?
How long has Hart been performing these temporary duties?
I'm thinking a couple of years. Since the person that staff member retired, so probably a couple of years. When that retirement happened, we did talk to WVRC, and I wasn't directly involved in that. I'm not sure what why they weren't able to do it at that point. But then the Harts came in to do it, and again, on a temporary basis, and then as we renewed our contract, it was time to expand the scope.
So they've been temporary doing it for 2 years or more.
2 years is a long temporary.
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. At the same price, it was a at the same point, it was a negotiated price.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Doesn't sound too temporary to me, but.
That's where we find ourselves. Yeah.
That's my opinion, so take it for what it's worth.
It's worth a lot of money.
Okay. All right, council, there's been a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, can I do a roll call vote on that, please? Olson?
Yes.
Sykes?
No.
Johnson?
No.
Kellum?
No.
Kopsinski?
Yes.
And Coburn is not here. That's 3-2.
So 2 yes, 3 no.
2 yes, 3 no, and since it failed to get 4 votes either way.
Yeah, it'll have to come back for the next council meeting then, or till when Bill gets back.
The only thing I would ask is what else you want us to do.
Bingo.
Proposal.
Well, can I just clarify something? Is Hart's Janitorial a state qualified company?
No, they're not.
And so the answer is they're not, and we have to negotiate with a state qualified company.
That's correct, and that's what we've been saying all along. Yeah.
So it would not, it's kind of mute when it comes to Hart Janitorial then.
By state, yeah, it can't go to Ken.
But we don't know if it's 14% under or over.
I don't know what you're asking.
$290,000. What's the total?
The total first year.
Including everything.
The total first year is $290,600. And then subsequent increases are based on whatever the CPI is.
Well, according to the Exhibit A that in our packet, it says it's 270.
That
$1,914.17.
was the reduction with the 20,000, yeah.
$20 less.
Yeah.
So it's 250 now.
Oh, so it's, yeah, 279.14.
270 is what's in the packet is
So
correct.
without a contract here, and we don't, council doesn't meet then on a Wednesday for 2 weeks, who's going to be doing the janitorial?
Well, we can do it on a temporary basis for the next 2 years. Sorry.
We will have to talk to WVRC and see if they can continue to do it on the current contract which expired.
I was going to say, they've been doing it out of contract since December, I think, right?
Right.
But they haven't been doing senior center, right, or they have been?
They have not been doing senior center, so that would remain, until the council gives us some direction that we can go, we'll just do it as we've been doing it. Knowing that we are out of compliance at the senior center.
Yeah, I just got to say, Mike and Rich, you're being obstinate, and you don't have any leverage in this, and it's just going to muck up the system.
What do you mean we don't have any leverage? Wait a minute, how do you figure? Because if this was put out to bid for everybody and QRF or whoever that QRF is bid it like everybody else, and they're 14% over everybody else's bid, then we can declare it an unfunded mandate. That's where I'm headed.
Yeah, and I'll fight you every step of the way on that.
Okay.
Let's just move on. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we're glad to come back without any additional direction or need for additional information. We'll just bring it back as is.
Yeah, okay, well, yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, council, next, you have another award of this bid, and this would be for a 2-year contract with, is it HASA? Is that what it's called, HASA?
Yes.
For the provision and delivery of low-salt sodium hypochlorite. It sounds like such an
Very good.
interesting
It's
subject.
bleach. Essentially.
Read your Clorox.
Very concentrated bleach, about 12.5%. It is a 2-year contract with the option to extend up to 2 additional 1-year terms. It went through a formal bid process. We had 2 respondents. HASA has been providing us chlorine for the wastewater plant and water plant for several years now. Their bid came in at 90 cents. The other bidder was at 2.45 cents per gallon.
Okay. Any questions? All right, there is a resolution on page 596.
I move for adoption of the resolution.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried, thank you. Okay, next, this would be approval of agreements. This would be the intergovernmental agreement with City of Millersburg for wastewater services. This is what we just had on Monday's agenda for discussion.
We told her she was going to be last.
Yeah.
She didn't care.
I know. Did you have any other comments on this, Chris?
Mayor, I just thought I'd give a very brief overview for the benefit of the viewing public.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So these are 2 intergovernmental agreements with Millersburg that renew and replace existing agreements. The first one is for the operation and maintenance of the wastewater collection system that Millersburg owns. We've been providing those services for quite a few years now, and there are not a whole lot of significant changes there. Essentially, the City of Albany is agreeing to coordinate with Millersburg and provide routine maintenance of the wastewater system as well as emergency response. We monitor their sewer lift stations and do emergency response as necessary. The second IGA covers the 2 jointly owned facilities. We jointly own the water reclamation facility and Talking Water Gardens with the City of Millersburg. This IGA describes ownership shares, processes needed to deal with capacity improvements or other things that may come up with the 2 facilities, capital project management, certified operator duties. Also describes the responsibilities of both parties under the MPDS discharge permit. and other related items. Both IGAs are for 10-year terms with 5-year renewals as long as neither party wishes to withdraw or terminate the agreements. So Millersburg's council will be voting on these in their July meeting. And so assuming it passes both councils, then they'll be enacted at that time. And that's it. Any questions?
Okay, questions? All right. What would you like to do with this item?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, and any discussion?
This is both of them in one time?
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Just so it's clear.
Okay, all right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, we made it through that 600-page agenda quite well, actually, in 2 hours, so that's not bad at all. Business from the council. Bessie, anything this evening?
Well, I just wanted to bring up that I think Marilyn's going to talk to Chris.
Already did.
Okay, about the same property we were talking about, 2977 Santiam Highway, or where the sign is, marijuana shop, stuff like that. Again, it's a focal point, and if I remember correctly, they said they were going to just keep it all clean and keep it all neat and stuff, and there's so many weeds around that, you know, sometimes you think it might be a fire danger, and so I'm just thinking that they need to be made to clean it up, or we do it and bill it.
That's why we have a compliance department, or a...
Yep, and so talk to Marilyn, she's gonna do it, but, you know, I think there are some other areas in town too, but I'll get ahold of Chris.
Yeah.
That's all.
I had a call from the owner probably a couple months ago, so they're kind of having some family issues, so I think that's why we haven't seen much cleanup around that property.
Well, they are working on it.
So.
They're doing some work on or maybe they already finished it, I don't know. There's quite a parking issue next door with I don't know whether it's encroachment or they just own it. There's just too many cars, not enough space, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, anything else, Missy? Okay, Jack? Okay, Rich?
Yes. 2 inches of paper. If we will recall, last Monday, doing this electronically makes a whole lot more sense. That's 14 inches of 16 inches of 18 of 20. That's a case of paper for one meeting.
And the time involved in printing and then distributing.
Delivering and. I think a fast track to find out what would be a good option would be a wonderful thing.
And we're on that track.
How did I know that?
I will volunteer to pay for every bit of paperwork sent to me. Thank you. I like to read it in front of me so I can mark it up. I don't like reading on a screen.
Yeah.
I agree.
And actually, I agree. It's just such a habit for me, is really been able to go through and.
I'm on record, I'll pay for my printing.
Yeah.
You now get $86
Yeah.
instead of $160.
But the only thing I can see, when it is large ones like this, then it is, that I'm not really needing to mark up. It would be nice just to kind of skim through. But most of mine before, I always read them online anyway, you know, before, because you counselors get yours on Friday, and then I wait and pick it up on Monday, so then I read it online, but, yeah, so.
I think this agenda was highly unusual, being 600 pages.
This agenda is unusual, and we did discuss today at our staff meeting the possibility of taking steps aside from actually iPads and implementing iPads or tablets to use links and references more than just outright copying the whole thing.
Yeah.
You mean have references to the boilerplate?
Well, as the mayor said, she looks at the stuff online. So there's a reference to it in your packet, and you can see it online.
Yeah.
The whole thing wouldn't be printed.
Well, and that would be.
So how do we get, just the agenda number, or the the ordinance and...
For instance, one of them was the CDBG action plan. The staff report would still be there, but the staff report would refer to the action plan that you would be able to see it online.
Yeah. That would
And that would save about 500 pages right there.
Yeah. Right. I think that would be a good idea also, yeah.
Whatever it works out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mayor, I was going to say also too, I was thinking as I was reading it, even if we only got the pages where the changes were, you know.
Yeah.
That, because there was probably only 10% of the pages that were even, had the yellow on it, so, you know, that might help, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think that works if you have memorized the existing ordinance. I find that some of that stuff kind of slips out of my mind.
Okay, Rich, was that it?
No. So a little bit of celebration. I just finished 2 years' worth of dental work, and finally, I am finished.
All right.
Finally.
2 years?
I now have zirconium teeth. They're actually zirconium oxide.
Yeah.
Or for most of them, anyway. Anyway,
You
it's
gonna
just...
take over the 007 franchise for Jaws?
No, that was Jaws. Those were stainless steel. These are harder than that.
You mean crowns? They're like
Crowns and bridges and...
Yeah. Yeah, I had just, a few weeks or last month, broke a crown, and then they replaced it with that zirconium type or titanium, whichever it was. But,
Zirconium oxide.
yeah, just so I don't break
Well,
another
hey,
one.
it's the right town to be doing that in.
Yeah, really.
Yep. Okay.
That's it.
Is that it?
Your
All right,
jaws
Ray?
don't glow too much.
Huh?
Your jaws don't glow too much.
Zirconium is not radioactive. There's nothing about it that's radioactive. It's
From
only the
the company.
fuel that you put inside the zirconium rods that is radioactive.
Ray, did you have anything? Okay, Mike?
Negative.
Okay, and I didn't either. And Peter, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, make a comment, I had the same reaction as Councilor Kellen did to the emergency clause. And when I brought that up with Jeff Blaine, he pointed out that, you know, this was inserted in there because of the caveat that it's for prompt and timely completion of important city business. And I do believe that if you overuse the term emergency, it loses some of its effectiveness. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. But in this particular case, it was deemed worthy of trying to make that happen as quickly as we could, even though it's not technically an emergency.
Well, we used to abuse it. And, you know, a number of us complained about it, and that was lowered, but, you know, emergency should be an emergency. You know?
Okay, was that it?
Yes.
Staff have anything? Oh, all right. Okay, so our next work session is July 9th, regular session is July 11th. Don't forget, next Thursday week on the 5th would be our first River Rhythms concert, and that's fireworks afterwards, so.
You don't mean tomorrow, but next week.
Yep, next week.
Next week.
And happy birthday.
So, yeah.
Happy Independence Day.
Yep,
Yes.
exactly, yep, so, okay, all right, with that, we're adjourned.